Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So today it is all about the brand new Sony A7 IV. Now, I've been using this camera since the day that it was released, and spoiler, it's an absolute beast. And I will have a full in-depth review of this camera once I spend a little bit more time with it. But at this point, I think I have a pretty good grasp on all the things I love about this camera. And there's definitely a few things that I wish were a little bit different or a little bit better about this camera as well. So in today's video, we're gonna talk about 5 things that I love about this camera and 5 things that I don't like about this camera. So I think this video is gonna be a lot of fun. I hope you guys get some value out of it. If you do, be sure to drop this video a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It helps out me a ton. But let's hop right into the 5 things that I love about the Sony A7 IV. So the first thing I love about this camera is how good the video looks. Now, in case you didn't know, Sony has kind of 3 different lanes when it comes to their Sony Alpha cameras. We have the Sony A7S line, which is the video dominant. Then we have the Sony A7R line, which is the photo dominant. And then we have the Sony A7 line, and that's kind of the hybrid shooter. So the Sony A7 IV is that hybrid camera, but I'm telling you, the video out of this camera looks absolutely amazing, and it's super, super comparable to the Sony A7S III or the FX3, which I'm filming on right now. You can shoot in S-Log3, S-Cinetone, so on and so forth, 4K, 24 or 30 frames per second uncropped. So big props to Sony on the 4K footage out of this camera. It looks really good. Now, next up, which is actually why I purchased the Sony A7 IV for myself, that is because it is great for photography. Now, as much as I love the FX3 or the Sony A7S III, they are amazing for video. They actually are decent at photography as well. I actually use my FX3 quite often for just social media photos, especially until I got a second camera body. I actually have a full video talking about me using the FX3 for photography, and actually it holds up pretty well. But 12 megapixels isn't really meant for commercial photography or photography for clients or things you need to print large or crop a bunch. And even the fact that the FX3 doesn't have an EVF on it, the Sony A7 IV is a great photography camera. And the fact that it comes in at 33 megapixels to me is the perfect sweet spot. It's gonna be enough megapixels for, client work and print work, but also the files aren't gonna be so gigantic like the Sony A7R IV, where you're getting like a 70 megabyte file for each raw photo. So next thing I love about this camera is the fact that it has this new technology where it fixes focus breathing. Now, in case you don't know what focus breathing is, let me try to show you an example right now. As you guys can tell, I'm in focus, and if I, let's say, put this iPad in front of the camera, if you look at the edges of the screen, you'll see that it kind of crops and does this thing where it's called focus breathing. So it changes its focus, and you see how the edge, it will now kind of change. It changes your crop slightly on the outside. Now, I'll insert a clip of me actually filming on the Sony A7 IV, and you guys will see it basically does this post-processing within the camera, and it knows what kind of lens you have on there, and it will help fix that. So let's test this focus breathing. Are you guys watching the edge right now of the screen? You see once this comes in, nothing, right? It's honestly just way less distracting, and that is such a nice feature. It's not breathing at all. Now, that might only work with certain lenses, or maybe it has to be a Sony G Master lens. I'm not exactly sure about that. If you guys know, let me know down in the comments below to, help each other out here. But that's actually a really cool feature, and I'm glad that Sony is implementing that. And honestly, I wish it was in my FX3. The next thing I love is if I was forced to, this actually could be an all-in-one camera for me. As I mentioned, it's great for photography. It's really good for video as well. There's a couple things that make it not the perfect video camera for me, which we'll get to once we talk about the things I don't like so much about it. But I would say most of what I shoot is actually in real time, 24 frames per second. And if I was shooting a little bit of off speed or slow motion stuff as well for video, I definitely could do it with this camera right here. And for a lot of people out there, if you're looking for a hybrid camera, this would be a really great option, and probably one of the best options out there for any type of camera that's under like $3 grand. And then the 5th thing I love about this camera is the fact that the dial up here now, I'll try to show you guys here, it has a photo and video mode. So that's a really nice feature, because what that does is it actually allows you to have custom buttons for both photo and custom buttons for video. On my video dominant camera here, the FX3, I have 3 custom modes. I have a 24 frames per second mode, a 60 frames per second mode, and then 120 frames per second mode. So I can just quickly change between those 3 custom modes, and all my settings are set up ready to go for whatever frame rate I'm shooting in. But since this camera, I'm actually gonna be shooting a lot of photo and video for. It's nice that I can have 3 different custom settings for not just video, but also for photo. So you just switch between whether you're in the photo or video mode, and you have 3 custom modes for each. So that's really nice. All right, so we're about halfway through this video. Those are the 5 things I love about this camera. And actually for the second half, let's actually film it on the Sony A7 IV, shall we? So let's compare the footage on the FX3 right now, which is basically the rehoused Sony A7S III, if you're looking for a comparison. That's what this is right now. And then let's switch over and talk about the 5 things I wish were a little bit better about the Sony A7 IV, and we're gonna shoot this on the Sony A7 IV. All right, and now we are on the Sony A7 IV. So the settings are exactly the same, I believe. I double checked everything like 3 times. So we're filming on the Sony A7 IV right now, and it should look pretty damn similar. But let's talk about the 5 things I wish were a little bit better about this camera. Now, the first thing I do not like about this camera is the fact that 4K 60 is cropped. For a lot of my stuff in the YouTube channel, I'm shooting in 60 frames per second, and honestly, a lot of my client work, I would say more often than not, I'm shooting in 60 frames rather than 24 frames. So can I get around that? Yes, I can still shoot in 4K 60, just knowing it's gonna be cropped. That is able to be worked around. But if I'm looking for a video camera for professional client work and I had the option, I'm going to get a camera that is shooting full frame 60 and that's not cropped. Now, the thing I will say about that is that I do think that this camera is a more budget-friendly price. If you're looking for a perfect hybrid camera, get something like the Canon R3 or even like the Sony Alpha 1. You're just gonna pay a lot more for that type of a camera. And also, I think if this camera had 4K 60 uncropped, a lot of people would not be getting the Sony A7S III anymore or the FX3 because this camera would kind of be a perfect all-in-one. Also, I should note that this camera doesn't have 4K 120 at all like the Sony A7S III does, but I don't think any camera at this price point should be expected to have that. So I'm not really counting that against this camera, but it is something to note if you're comparing it to the Sony A7S III. Now, the next thing about this camera is that there has been some overheating issues with it. Now, I'm personally haunted by overheating because I'm coming from the Canon R5, a little over a year ago. Now, before you freak out about that, I actually don't think it's that big of an issue. A buddy of mine, Chris Brockhurst, over on Twitter, I'll have his channel linked down in the description below. He did a little bit more deep dive into this and had some testing done. And it looks like if you're shooting 4K 60 and you have the swivel screen actually into the camera, it will eventually overheat. But if you have that flip out screen outside of the camera, like to the side like it is right now, it will not overheat. So kind of an odd issue, but I will say it makes me a hair nervous if I was doing client work with it. But as long as that swivel screen is out to the side, I don't think you have anything to worry about, but I'm gonna have to do some more testing for myself. Now, next thing up is that this camera does have some rolling shutter. Now on the Sony A7S III and the FX3, they really fixed that issue. So it's honestly not even something to think about on those cameras, but I'll actually insert a clip from Gerald Undone, which if you haven't checked him out yet, he does like the most technical reviews on YouTube about camera gear. So I'll have his channel linked down below. But you can definitely tell on the Sony A7 IV, there is some rolling shutter. Now, is that important to you or will you notice it? Maybe not, but if you are living deep into the video world and you do content all the time like that with a lot of movement and things, you definitely will notice it. To me, it's not really the biggest deal, but depending on what type of content you shoot, it might be a big deal. So I do want to note that. The next one is going to be that it doesn't come with a battery charger in this camera. But it's kind of a bummer that you're spending like $2,500 plus with tax for this camera, and it doesn't even come with a battery charger in the box. But I actually use this one by Newer. It is just a battery charger that is a dual battery charger. It's honestly, I think like 10 or 15 bucks. And I prefer this one anyways because it's USB-C, so I can plug it with power bank or a power brick. But I'd recommend this one. I'll have it linked down in the description below. But yeah, come on Sony, just give us a charger. Now, last thing I don't like about this camera, which honestly, I'm getting into the nitty gritty. I really had to think about what I don't like about this camera. But honestly, it is kind of a factor, especially now that I'm filming on it right now, is the fact that it doesn't have tally lights. So when I'm recording with the FX3, as you guys will see here, you get these little tally lights. So I have one on the record button, one back here, and then one on the front as well. And I've kind of just become accustomed to how nice that is. We've all been in the video world where you hit record, you think you hit record at least, you start filming something and you missed a moment or you have to repeat it again because you actually weren't recording. It's a very small thing, but especially if you're ever running 2 cameras at once, it's nice to just be able to glance over and see if both cameras are physically recording. And honestly, on the Sony A7 IV, it's not that obvious. I get that this isn't a cinema camera, but since it is supposed to be for the hybrid shooter, that's just something that I would like to see Sony bring to future cameras in their lineup, because it wouldn't be that hard to make the record button light up red just like they did on this camera right here. All right guys, so that really sums up the things that I love about this camera, as well as the things I wish were a little bit better about it. Even though I mentioned 5 things I don't like so much about this camera, I will say the pros really outweigh the cons here for the Sony A7 IV. I truly think it's a great camera. The photography is awesome out of it, as well as 4K footage as long as you're shooting 24 and 30 frames per second. And honestly, if you're shooting 4K 60, you can totally get around that. It's totally workable. You just have to keep that in mind whenever you're filming, that you are going to be cropped. So if you're on the fence about this camera, I definitely would recommend it. And I don't think you're going to get a better hybrid camera unless you're spending like $5,000 or $6,000. In that case, I honestly would tell you guys to go what my route is, where I have 2 camera bodies, a more video dominant and a more photo dominant camera, and you're coming in about at the same price as the Sony Alpha 1, but you have 2 camera bodies instead. But guys, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below about the Sony A7 IV. Do you think this is a total home run, or do you think this is a complete miss by Sony? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. And as I mentioned, I will have a full in-depth review of the Sony A7 IV once I spend a little bit more time with it and I shoot some more content, both video and photo, and I can really show some good examples of both for you guys. But I think that's gonna be it for me in today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. If you did, will you please drop this video a thumbs up. If you're new around here, consider subscribing. It helps out me and the channel more than you can even imagine. And I will catch you guys in the next video very, very soon. Peace, guys.